Morning, people. So, Lucy Letby. If you don't know who she is, just Google her. I'm not here to talk about her because if you're a normal human being, we all feel the same way about her and especially about the parents of her victims. But what I would like to talk about today is this. You may have seen I did a TikTok yesterday about how the BBC reported it.
I don't know what Britain's most prolific child killer should look like, but I'm pretty sure it's not this.
Now, for full disclosure, the BBC reporter then goes on to say,
I can't get my head around who Lucy Letby is. And I'm saying that as somebody who sat in a courtroom for most of a year looking at her. She doesn't look now anything like the photos that were all over her socials before this case began. So if you looked then at her Facebook, you would have seen somebody at the centre of student life in Chester, photos of her as a nurse that were in the local paper because she was fundraising for the hospital. She looked like a poster girl, and now she looks completely different. Her hair colour has changed, she looks gaunt.
So you could argue that when she's saying that this isn't what a serial baby killer should look like, she means that she's sociable, that she's hanging out with friends, that she went to uni, that she's a nurse. But for starters, we've all watched more than enough documentaries to know that a lot of serial killers are very sociable. They blend in. That's how they get away with it. But even if you wanted to make that point, you'd say this isn't how a serial killer is supposed to act, not look. Because what we're left with is a BBC journalist saying that serial killers are supposed to look like the exact opposite of that physical appearance, which basically says to the audience, hey, you know those little prejudices and stereotypes that you have in your head about what bad people are supposed to look like? Yeah, listen to that. She's just the exception. And I'm not here to attack that journalist for what she said, because do you know how many editors and producers and scriptwriters and reviewers that had to go through before it got into our TVs? All of those people would have been aware of how profiling and stereotyping work in our society, and most importantly, they would have known that that kind of assumption that serial killers don't look like Lucy Letby is almost definitely part of how she got away with it for so long. And this is a common problem. The way we talk about threats in society ends up skewing our perception of where those threats are coming from. For example, if you were to think of the threat of rape, for example, and how that's discussed in the media, you would picture a man, probably poor, of ethnic minority, grabbing you from a dark alley. But the most common setting for rape in Europe is in the victim's own home, which means they're more likely to be from a similar demographic to the victim. So how did that hospital trust get it so wrong that the doctors who raised the alarm about Lucy Letby ended up being forced to apologise to Lucy Letby? Now, the Nursing and Midwifery Council is the body that decides if nurses get to keep being nurses, and this is a report they published about why nurses from ethnic minorities are more likely to be referred to them for fitness to practice complaints. And while they did find that black nurses were more likely to be referred to them for fitness to practice complaints, there are several stages to that process. After the complaint has been made, it goes to the screening stage where they decide if the complaint is worth investigating. And at that stage, complaints against white nurses are more likely to be thrown out, while complaints against black nurses are more likely to be thrown out after the investigation is concluded. And when we get to the final stage, white nurses are more likely to be banned from working as a nurse entirely, which in my eyes means that when there's less information to go on, white people are more likely to be let off. Whereas when there's more information to go on, black people are more likely to be let off. And that actually mirrors what we see in the criminal justice system. Because as we know, black people are arrested 3 times as much as white people, and yet the conviction rates for black people are at 79%, whereas the conviction rates for white people are at 85%, which means that black people are more likely to be put in front of a judge when there isn't enough evidence to convict them. Similarly, black nurses are more likely than white nurses to be sent through to the investigation stage when there isn't enough evidence to sack them as nurses. And in the report by the General Medical Council, which deals with doctors, they found the same problem, talking about insider groups and outsider groups, and they said that this problem ends up shielding some doctors from disciplinary action. Now, I got a lot of hate on Twitter for making this point, but I didn't start this. I was responding to this.
I don't know what Britain's most prolific child killer should look like, but I'm pretty sure it's not this.
Our media chose to make this about what a serial killer should look like, and they thought they wouldn't get any pushback? Well, hey, I'm pushback. I mean, can you imagine being one of the many nurses from ethnic minorities who went through the complaints process, the screening process, the investigation process, only to find out they did nothing wrong? Meanwhile, hospital managers are apologizing to nurses who kill infant patients. Because if Lucy Letby had been a black, working-class immigrant who didn't have parents that had the ability to threaten the hospital, do you really think she would have gotten away with it for that long? Because according to the BBC,
I don't know what Britain's most prolific child killer should look like, but I'm pretty sure it's not this.
So I'm not the one who's bringing racism into this. Taking racism out of this probably could have saved lives. I'm Femi. Have a great week.